Anyway, welcome everyone who's coming. For those who don't know, I am Mike.
I'm George.
And we're with Our Urban Farms, and you can find more about us at oururbanfarms.com. This is a fun and exciting event, and I'm thrilled to be doing it today. The weather outside is getting warm. Strangely enough, it's March, and we're having our first tornado watches today here in Minnesota.
And a snowstorm to the north and west here at the same time.
And so it's fun to be getting together for our recurring Transition on Tap event now via Zoom because of COVID. And we're thrilled to have Dan Bostan with us, who is from Quebec and who has been working for better than 10 years, as I understand it, to perfect indoor greenhouses that will allow people to grow foods from 4 zones warmer than where they live, and without adding energy to heat them. It's a fascinating conversation we're really looking forward to. We're going to open it up for questions after, so now everybody's microphones are muted just to keep the conversation as focused as we can. But when we're all done talking with Dan, we're going to open it up. If you have questions that you want to ask Dan, you have the ability to raise your hand. Just find the control. It's in a different place, whether you're on your computer, whether you're on your phone, whether you're on a tablet, but there's an option for you to raise your hand. And then we can unmute you and you can ask your question. Or if you would want instead, you can type your question into the chat window. And we'll get that message and we can ask the question for you, whichever you'd prefer. But anyway, we have to get to Dan Bostan. Welcome, Dan. We're thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that it's a very pleasant occasion to be invited by Mike and George. I would like to thank them and to tell you that it is a sincere pleasure. And indeed, today, even in Montreal, where we live, Canada, it was a very nice day, so the spirit is sort of up, it's great to be able to exchange some thoughts with passionate people about fruits and vegetables grown locally.
Yeah, and I'll have to say, George and I just, we're cruising through YouTube recently, and we came across your video. And if those of you who haven't watched it, I think we've shared it out on the Transition Longfellow website. We'll put a link to it in the description for the video that we're making. Just getting started. And, I'm curious, when we watched your video, Dan, I was inspired by it, in part because it seemed to me that you're just like a guy. You're not a movie producer, and there you are making this movie. But the content was so interesting to me, and it seemed to me that you must have some sort of background in engineering or food production. And so I'm just curious if you could start, before we get into looking at all the different greenhouses that you build and what goes into making them, as weatherproof as you can, tell me, how did you, what's your background in engineering? What's your connection to food? And what drove you to starting this project 10 years ago?
Very well. So I'm an engineer by formation. I'm a mechanical engineer. I was born and raised in Romania. I spent half of my life there where I met my wife, and then about 30 years ago, we came to Canada. Now, it so happened that we came to Canada when a big recession here started in the 1990s. And so there was no way to get a job into my field, and nor my wife into her economics field. So by chance, we got into real estate. And it was a very interesting experience. We got to meet a lot of people in different domains, so in shopping centers, in industrial buildings, in office buildings. And on the other hand, back in Romania, we have climate zone 7. So fruits like cherries, apricots, peaches, nectarines, table grapes, they are growing there naturally. And I was born there, and when I opened the eyes into this life, they were all around us, and we enjoyed them a lot because they literally were organic fruits and grown. We were picking them up from the trees, and unfortunately, we took them for granted. That was how life was supposed to be. But we came
And
here.
Canada, then you moved to
Yes.
Canada.
And we woke up. No, there's not everywhere like that. So, but it took us about 20 years to get settled and then to worry about many things that we had to encounter in this interesting experience until we calmed down a bit. And then a certain nostalgia got installed. We started to think of the fruits that we used to enjoy in our country. And the question was, would it be possible to grow them here as well? And I tried a bit with some cherry trees, and then somebody by chance told me, Dan, don't worry about that. In Montreal, you will never be able to grow cherries, period. It's that simple. And that was good because I stopped trying to grow them outside. I was also a bit shocked because I got enthusiastic and to meet somebody to tell you stop, you're on the wrong way. It's not necessarily pleasant, but it was a great chance. And then I said, okay, if that way is blocked, maybe there's a way around it. And the way
So
around
something tells me you're a little bit of a stubborn. You got a little bit of a stubborn streak, and you said, "Well, I'm going to find a way to do it anyway."
You're right, and that comes from the desire, because the thought was it would be so great to be able to taste again those fruits. That was what was the core motivation, and so this is how I started to build some small experimental greenhouses around the house, and then I built one, and then another one, and then another one, and I planted some fruit trees, some cherries, then grapevines, and so on. And the more I did that, I saw that it was possible, and so that gave me more courage. And then I tried to build a bigger one, and then the city came over and said, "Hey, hold on, you're not allowed to build such a big greenhouse here." And so I had to demolish them and then practically start again. But the good part was that I already had the chance to test them. I installed thermometers and so on. And so I recorded everything. And so the main purpose of seeing if it is possible was achieved. Now it was just to replicate it.
And we're going to, in just a couple of minutes, we're going to go through a little slideshow of the 7 different greenhouses that you've built so far. They're the greenhouses that are featured in your YouTube video, which again will be linked to in the description for this video once it's published, so people can easily get back to that. But it occurred to me in watching your video that you published that you learned a lot along the way, not just about growing fruit, but about building greenhouses. But you reached a kind of big conclusion that I'd like to kind of tease it a little bit here in the beginning and come back to it at the end, where, you know, the potential for using these technologies to build large-scale indoor food forests that don't require external heat sources to maintain them is a big deal. And can you just talk to me about what that awakening was like for you, and why you think that might be important for us to learn how to do now?
Great question. So there are 2 parts. One, why is that important? Now, if you pick up, if you take a fruit from the store, the reality is that they have very little taste. And that's number one. But number 2 is that we know for a fact that they are full of chemicals. And so on one hand, we do not necessarily enjoy them as we should. And second, we don't know what we are eating. It's that simple. And ever since I realized that, I don't know if you're aware of that, but if you just search on Google an apple, if you would just ask how many times an apple tree has to be sprayed with pesticides, with other products in a season to be able to get the apple at the end, you will be shocked. I will not tell you the answer, but I'll let you enjoy it.
Well, and plus we're using all kinds of energy to move it around.
Exactly,
And
exactly. And so
it,
anyway,
as part of Transition Longfellow, the transition group here in the Longfellow neighborhood that's working on sustainability issues, one of the things that we talk about is disaster and emergency preparedness. And one of the things that I think is amazing about the idea of growing foods locally that couldn't otherwise grow here is that it means that, you know, it could make us more food independent. And there's not needing to rely on large supply chains where you're shipping food huge distances across the country, but being able to produce our own, you know, peaches, you know, and table grapes that we wouldn't normally be able to grow here in Minnesota would be just a huge benefit, I think, to the whole community. And
absolutely.
so with that in mind, let's just keeping time. I just want to like start showing some of your work and get into your taking a look at some of your slides. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen here.
Yeah, one of the things that really hit me, I'm not surprised that you said you had an engineering background, because when I look at these, one of the things that was most impressive is the thought process that you had in terms of the site and, you know, the building of it, the materials that you used, etc. That it had a holistic kind of approach to it, it seemed, and the craftsmanship around it was meticulous. So
you can see my
really
screen.
impressive.
You can
Yes.
see my screen where it says underground greenhouse.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So this I believe this was your kind of your first one. Is that
Exactly.
so?
So
Tell
this
us about
is.
this greenhouse.
Thank you very much, Josh, for your note. This is not at all representative of that. Now, just to put ourselves into the context, we were in October. I had probably a couple of hundred of fig trees and young fig trees and a few cherry trees in pots and grapevines. And I had to enter in winter with them because I got all excited that year to buy them all. And now we had to get into winter and I didn't know what to place them. So I figured, okay, let's try to build this underground greenhouse, which in the first winter, actually, it was more like an underground storing space. So as you can see here, I dug about 4 feet down and I took the earth and I placed it all around in a berm. And this was attached to the house. It was on the south side of the house. I didn't have time to worry about much of the aesthetic of this construction, as you can see, but I tried to worry about the soundness of the construction. As you may see, I left the bottom part of the walls uncovered, so whatever heat came from the underground would benefit the greenhouse, the space. And I put some cheap wood OSB on the top part with some insulation, so styrofoam on the outside to protect and to add a bit of insulation, because the higher we go, the colder it gets from the atmosphere. So this is one image of in the initial part of the construction. We can move to the next. And you see, this was what happened. So once I closed it, and actually the roof was, I put quickly because the winter was coming. I dug all that by hand, by the way, because there's not much space. And
yeah, we're going to get into your digging habits a little bit later on one of your bigger projects. I couldn't believe that.
All I wanted, yes, all I wanted to say is that there was not much time so I put a roof with a sheet of plywood and I sprayed some urethane on it. As you can see on the top part of the walls, I did the same. And I placed all these plants in there. And this image is probably from end of February, beginning of March. And you see the grapevines, they all went very well through the winter. We maintain a temperature just a bit above 0 Celsius, meaning above 32 Fahrenheit. And everybody was happy, as you can see. There was no light from the roof. So when I saw all that growing, I installed a couple of neon lights to give them a bit of light. And then as it got a bit warmer, then I opened a side entrance into the wall that was all the light that was in this space, and the plants appreciate it. And I should mention, plants adapt impressively well if they get some of what they need, like the worms or a good soil. They can accept certain things and they can go beyond. I love them. I adore plants, and particularly fruit plants.
And so during the winter, then I'm assuming there's virtually no maintenance to these plants. You just
No, none whatsoever. We don't even water them because they go dormant. Now they are green now because they were working up in the end of winter. But during I didn't send you, I apologize, a picture from January, and you would see they were all dormant, nothing exciting, but all in peace. Another image from the same place, you see some grapevines in the center. On the left side here, there are some cherry trees, young cherry trees. They were, these are the ones. So these are cherry trees, which had some, I didn't know, they had buds that were ready to produce flowers and then fruits. They started to flower in that cave. It was
Wow.
impressive. So you imagine what I was feeling. And that was the reward for the work that I have done. So it was amazing. It was
so these are the cherry trees. They said you couldn't grow them in
exactly
the area, and
yes.
You got them through the first winter, and you learned a lot from your first
yes.
greenhouse. Wow, that's just amazing. And we're going to get back again. You dug that all by hand, which I found fascinating. So then it is, and tell me if I'm right, this is chronological. The next greenhouse is a cherry greenhouse. Then you needed something to plant them in.
Exactly. So it was the need that pushed the research, the experiment.
You're a man after my own heart, let me just tell you.
So this is
that's how I would roll. Let's get a bunch of trees. We'll figure out what to do with them later.
Yes, true. So this was in front of the house because that was the place where I thought I could plant those trees into the ground, those young cherry trees. So I did that, but as I had many other plants in pots, I also put them while I was building the structure, as you can see it. All the structures.
This is actually something that you built and designed yourself. This is
not
from anywhere.
Yes, all the structures of the greenhouses that I built were from wood, just to make it clear. I love wood, and I believe it has a few advantages over metal. One is that you work it a bit easier. Second, it's warmer than metal. And the third one would be that personally, I consider it a bit nicer than metal work. There are some metal works that can be beautiful, but in greenhouses, I didn't see one that impressed me more than a wood structure.
The outside structure of this is, I know it's not a huge greenhouse, but I think it's just really pretty. You'll see some other examples, some other angles of it. It's just really, really a pretty structure. And I'm guessing, I have all kinds of questions about snow and weight bearing and engineering around that. I'm guessing though those arches in the top help with that a bit. Is that true? Or
yes.
how do you manage through the calculating, potential snow cover and weight bearing for that?
That is a very good question. Now, this one, I believe we even have a picture from wintertime later on, but this one has a polycarbonate sheet on top of the structure. So the roof is not a plastic sheet, it's a polycarbonate, which is a bit, it's more rigid than polyethylene. And if you curve it, then its strength multiplies. If you take anything, as a matter of fact, if you take a rod, if you take even a sheet of paper, and if you hold it on the two sides and then you press it, it has almost no resistance. But if you curve it and you hold it here, and you will feel that it's much stronger. The same thing with the polycarbonate. As it was installed on this curved wood structure, it increased its strength. And
the only challenge becomes curving the wood structure.
That is correct. That is correct. And I started from zero. A friend of mine showed me a model built by some people 30 years before, and I was impressed. It was very simple, and it was impressively strong after 30 years. And I said, okay, if they did it that way, I think I can do a bit better. So that was like the model that I tried to improve a bit and replicate.
And
So
so
this is an image, yes.
that's like covered in snow.
Exactly. And the sides, I just put polyethylene, so regular plastic, not regular, it's UV protected from that people are using for greenhouses. And there was that. There was no other element that would improve the thermal efficiency of this construction, but it was good enough for those trees because it cut the wind. And that is extremely important because when we say a climate zone, and we say that this climate zone, let's say climate zone 4 is in between this temperature and that temperature, the minimum temperature in winter time. That is one thing, but it doesn't express everything because if we are, let's say at 20 degrees Fahrenheit, for instance, and we are outside, if there is wind, the actual temperature can be 10 degrees Fahrenheit or even colder. Whereas and that is what the plants will feel. But when we are inside the greenhouse, there's no wind factor. So if it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit, that is precisely what we will have, or 20 or whatever. So there is a hidden gain, if we want, in temperature. When we look at the temperature, it's actually the benefit is even bigger than that.
Well, and the earth itself has some warmth to it. So if you can contain any warmth from the soil or the dirt, you know, even if it's a little bit, you're just providing some insulation over that is going to get you somewhere.
True.
So that's, I mean, so did you have temperature measurements from this? Because this seems
not in this one. This one, again, I was always against time, and we have to keep in mind, I had a full-time job in the meantime. Yeah. So all these constructions that you see have been done evening, weekends, holidays. That was all that I could use.
And so each one of these greenhouses contributed something to your end design. What did you get from this specific greenhouse that you...
Very good point. So in the first one, which was the underground one, the main lesson was that it is possible, because that was by far, at least at that moment, the most thermal efficient one that I could build. And I did install thermometers, and I have temperatures and so on to prove that. This one, it's mainly the arches. So it's the structure of the roof, which was very important because I started from zero. I had no idea how that could be done. And as you can see here, we have arches that are sitting on vertical walls, which is one way possible of doing it. It's not the strongest one, and it costs more and it takes more time to build. But this is what I was able to do at the time. And the roof, as you can see, is round. Much stronger would be a Gothic structure, meaning an arch on one side and another arch on the other side, which would meet here. And that is much stronger than this one. But as you can see, on the other hand, the arches here are made of two strips of 1x3 on top, and the same thing at the bottom, and in between some wood blocks. And while building them, I noticed that if the wood blocks would be just a bit weaker, some of them may split. So that gave me an idea of the tension that was in these arches. And so that was one lesson, and that directed me to try to find another way of building the arches, because that was nice and was okay for the time being, but that was not at all what I intended to build, much more reliable than this in the future.
Yeah, very good. And
yeah,
clearly it worked.
So this is an image inside. So in spring, in that greenhouse, those young trees that we saw earlier, I mean, a year earlier, now they were on their own in the ground and they were blooming. So that was great.
Very nice. And so you've got a polycarbonate roof on it. I know some of your greenhouses, you specifically talk about opening the roof up to allow the rain to just rain down on them in the summer. How did that work with these trees? Did you just water them by hand then?
Actually, that happened in the very last one, and it wasn't that I searched for that solution. It was that the last one was a greenhouse converted from an old barn. And I, again, as I was running after the ball in all these, I had ordered the trees. I planted them outside for the summertime. Then I started working in the barn. I had to cut. There was a concrete floor. I cut it and I removed it. There was a metal roof. There was a ceiling that I had to remove. And it so happened that I didn't have time by the time November came to remove the roof and replace it with the plastic roof. So I only brought the trees from the outside in November, and we went through that winter that way with the metal roof on top. The next spring, they started to bloom. I'm talking a few years later than what this image shows now, but just to answer your question. And so when I saw that the trees were blooming, I started to remove with my wife the roof, the metal roof. But again, I had many other things to do at the greenhouse rather than putting the plastic. So that entire summer, we remained without the roof. I just left it in the open to benefit from the rain. And it so happened that it was a quite dry summer, so there was not enough rain, and the neighbor had to still help me. But it helped each time it was raining. It was helping. But I'm not looking at. I rather collect the water, the rainwater,
Sure.
somehow, and use it later when I consider it necessary, rather than to remove the roof completely, because that has some other drawbacks which I prefer to avoid.
Sure, that makes total sense. And if you can capture the water, then
Yes.
use it, then why not? So large greenhouse. Oh yeah.
Yes.
So this is a beautiful greenhouse.
This was the third one. And if you notice here, the arches are not as pronounced and is I was doing later, because again, I prefer to have vertical walls so that I can benefit from a larger space. But they were, if we cut one of those arches, we'll have an H cross section, which was much stronger than the previous one. So in terms of what I learned from this one was that the arches could be done better, stronger. And in the meantime, in this space, which was about 1,200 square feet, more or less, I planted a few fruit trees, some grapevines, and some other plants. And so I saw what it would look like to have what I like to call an indoor orchard. It's beautiful. And also on the surrounding area, on the walls, I put some bags, some garbage bags, big garbage bags, heavy duty, and I fill them with earth. And this way I started to protect the walls a bit. So that was the beginning of having berms around the greenhouse. I'm not sure if we have an image of that.
Yeah, let's see. Well,
here they are.
Yeah.
You see all those are garbage bags, which are filled about 2.5 feet with earth, in which in springtime I planted tomatoes. And as I didn't know how thermal efficient this will be, you see, I bought some straws, and I covered the young plants that I planted directly in the ground, because I didn't know how well this will perform, but it was fine. And yeah, here we are. So you see, in those bags, I planted tomatoes, and that worked out very well. And so from there on, that was one thing that I kept in mind to use at a later time. This is another image. So I was talking about the beauty. Now I'm not sure if the image is showing, but
I think it's beautiful.
When you're walking in it, yeah, everything else disappeared in your mind.
Yeah, I said, wow. And then this is also just a lovely space. This is your, I think, the
yes.
Yeah.
So the first three I built, as I mentioned, without asking any permission from the municipality, because I knew the answer would be no. So they were experimental greenhouse. I wanted to learn. Otherwise, they would have said no, and I wouldn't have been able to go through that. But this one, I asked for a permit. I prepared a set of plans, and I built it. So this is again attached to the house. It's about 22 feet wide along the house, and about 20 feet uh, long, let's say. And
Is this the same house? So you have all these
the
greenhouses
same house,
attached
the
to
same
one?
house. Yes. It's just this is on the east side. The first greenhouse was on the south side, so towards us.
Yeah.
And here I used, you see, the arches are made of laminated wood. So this is the final shape of the arches, and this is the one that I've been using ever since, every time I had a chance.
It's absolutely just beautiful space. And if I remember from your video, your key motivator here was to get table grapes.
Exactly, exactly. So we installed a wood flooring on the central part, and we left a strip of about 1.5 feet of earth, a bare earth, all around. And there I put some compost, and I planted some grapevines for table grapes. Yes, so grapes that we eat. And in between, I planted a few roses.
It's beautiful space. I mean, absolutely.
Yes, we enjoy it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look at that.
Yes.
Just beautiful.
So I love this greenhouse, and I'm gonna mispronounce Hugelkultur, I'm sure, for sure. But I'm curious, just in case other people are not familiar with Hugelkultur, could you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into looking at this greenhouse. I found this to be fascinating.
Yes.
And
Sorry.
and it seems to me like you incorporated this in all of the greenhouses after.
Yes. So the Hugelkultur is a concept that started in Germany. People realize that if they have some wood laying on the ground, and if they put some earth on top of it, then the wood would start to disintegrate, obviously, in time. But in the meantime, it would act more or less like a sponge. Each time it was raining, the wood was absorbing water, and then in periods of time when there was no rain, that inside underground moisture would help the vegetation on top of it. So people started to develop this in various ways. And so they created some berms, wood in the core center. So various techniques, some with raised beds and so on. So here it so happened that I cut a tree that was old, and also created quite a lot of shadow in our backyard. And I had all this wood laying, and then I learned not long before that about the hugelkultur concept. And I said, let's put it together. So what I did here, I cut the wood in small logs, as you can see, and I laid them on a perimeter. I already had some fig trees planted in that area that you see in the middle. So I surrounded those fig trees with these logs. And then I started to put earth in between and start to build a wall. As you can see, and it's not very pretty, but that was the idea, to have wood covered in earth. And then from there, I built a structure, a very poor and poorly looking structure, but the point was to experiment, to see if that would bring anything. And so in the end, I closed it all. And also on the walls all around, I said, this is a space that can be used. So I created what can be called some planting shelves.
I'm
So,
sorry, I just think that is spectacular. You know, you built fundamentally, I just see you built earthen walls that are the insulation to the greenhouse, and that you can grow food in summer and winter. I mean,
that is the idea. That is precisely the idea.
It's beautiful.
It so happened that a neighbor.
It sounds like it's like ideas, one idea generated another idea, generated another idea.
You
This
are so
wasn't
right.
a whole, you didn't go into this with the whole concept in mind. It kind of grew as you were
You are so right, George.
experimenting.
Yes. And you know, we're talking about digging, but I literally believe that the closer we get to the construction process, meaning we can have a crew, we can have equipment and so on, but at this level of individual experimentation, if you get to work it step by step, not rushing it, then you start to somehow pulse with your project and start to understand it a bit better. And from time to time, you may get an idea that I believe otherwise you may miss. And you see, this is how it happens. It so happened, you see on the left side, there's a fence. That is the fence towards our neighbor. In a few months earlier, our neighbor decided to change their fence. And when I saw all the wood that they were taking, which was treated wood, it was old. Now, it didn't contain almost anything in it, but it was wood available, and it was 1x6, which is good wood. And I asked him, don't throw it away, give it to me. And this is what I use for these shelves. So you see, sometimes you get something that comes or it's sitting there, like the logs earlier, like this old fence, which is just waiting for you to put them together.
Well, and there's a fascinating thing about this that I think about when it didn't occur to me when I watched your video the first time, but that Hugelkultur concept, it's all about taking that wood, using it to nourish the soil while also building a structure and using that, you know, in the structure, but the decomposition of all that wood also generates heat.
True.
And
True.
so,
True.
you know, there it adds an additional heat source to the inside of that greenhouse.
True.
So as long as there's some decomposition going on, and there's some heat going on in there too.
Exactly.
I just love this greenhouse. This is actually one of my favorite ones. I can just envision that covered in, you know, kale or lettuce or spinach or
Exactly.
anything. The walls to that thing, and this is the inside. Look at that.
Yes, this is an image actually from last summer. As you see, there are some arches on top of it which weren't in the previous image because I did modify it. I cannot just leave it. New ideas are coming up, and I feel like trying to honor them and test them. So that main structure that you saw in the previous pictures, now I'm trying something new on it. I prefer to talk about this as the winter will finish because I've been monitoring it, and so far so good. But I prefer to see. I don't want to jinx it. So yeah, this is an image from last summer. And it so happened that there were a couple of tomatoes that grew, volunteer tomatoes that were in the soil, and they just grew. So they added to the initial plants that we planted.
Wow, how fun! So and this greenhouse is so small and easy. It seems like just about anybody could put one of these on the side of their house.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you see, this is the place where the original underground greenhouse was located. If you see at the base of the window on the right and left, there's still some marks on the bricks, black marks. Those were from the former roof, because I tried to put some tar to seal the former roof of the underground greenhouse to the house. I don't know if you can see them. Anyways, it doesn't matter. So at a certain point, apricot trees came to mind. I said, wow, I didn't buy any, I didn't plant any. So I searched around and I managed to find a few. I planted them, and that was in summertime, and then fall was coming, and I knew that I had to protect them. And how should I protect them? So I thought of this. This was definitely a one winter project. I didn't intend to keep it for longer because the municipality would learn about that quicker. as well. So I built these arches, which, as you can see, they are laminated wood arches. I built them in the basement, and I took them out through that bottom window that you can see when they were ready, and then I installed them the way you see. And they did a great job with the protection of the house as well. That was just what those apricot trees needed. You see, I just put a plastic sheet on top of it, and then I closed the sides as well. This was, here we are.
Yeah, it's simple. And then again, you close it up and just left it there for the winter.
Yes.
With no maintenance at all.
Yes.
Lovely, lovely, lovely.
And this is what we are seeing from the window, from the house. So in springtime, they started to bloom.
Well, and you know, being up against the house with windows there, they're getting some extra.
Yes, whatever we're losing.
And,
you're right. You're right.
I have a question.
And it's actually insulating your house as well at the same time.
Exactly. There's a symbiosis between the house and the greenhouse. Yes,
yeah,
George.
I have a question just in terms of like planting this with an eye towards the future when you're building your greenhouses, because obviously these trees are going to continue to grow and get bigger. Is the greenhouse sufficient enough to allow the trees to mature and continue to grow, or is there a point at which they'll outgrow the greenhouse structure?
Very good point. Now, there are 2-3 aspects that we can touch. One is there are normally the fruit trees are grafted, right? So there's a base with the root, and that is called the rootstock. And then there's the top part of the tree, and that's the variety that you'd like to have, the variety of apricots or cherries and so on. And the type of the rootstock that we use determine the size of the future tree. And there are some that are being conceived to generate trees that are not growing that tall. So they are like dwarf or semi-dwarf trees. Mm-hmm. They could be half the size of a normal tree, which can be very, very convenient for a greenhouse. And an added benefit of these rootstocks is that they also induce a certain precocity to the trees, meaning that those trees are starting to produce fruits much earlier than the normal trees. And so there are 2 very important benefits in this case. And that's one aspect. The other aspect is that you can also, and you should actually also prune the trees. So you can keep them under control, but there's a certain limit, because if the tree naturally has a tendency to grow to a certain height and you try to cut it to remain half of it, let's say, that's not going to work. The tree will try to always fight and grow branches, but not fruits. So that is something very fine that you can work. And the third one is that obviously when you conceive a greenhouse for a fruit tree production, then the height has to be appropriate.
Yeah, well, I'm listening attentively because I've got 3 lemon trees and a tangerine tree upstairs in a little solarium that I've been nurturing for a while. So.
Excellent.
But so they obviously did well in that.
Yeah, there's some fruits, if you notice.
Yeah.
The same trees from the flowers that we saw earlier. These are some green apricots.
Yeah, very good. And then this is the big guy, the big barn.
Yes.
This thing is huge. And, you know, I've been teasing you a little bit about your digging, but when you got to the part of your video where you were talking about that this barn had a concrete floor in it, and you literally cut the floor out by hand. Talk about your digging by hand and you're removing concrete by hand. Boy, more power to you. I'm not going to be one of those people doing that.
No.
But so yeah, anyway, that was the thing that stood out for me in this one. It had a concrete floor that you hand dug out. But tell us about this. This is a big space.
Yes, it's about 3,500 square feet. It's about 34 feet wide by about 105 feet long. It's an old barn. I don't know how old it was. The structure of the wood is the roof is original. So there are trusses with quite a lot of wood. It's oriented north-south, so not necessarily ideal for a greenhouse, but it didn't matter. When I saw it, I saw the opportunity. I couldn't sleep thinking about how I can convince the owner, because this is on a leased piece of land, this project. So I convinced them, and they were very nice and receptive, and we got to this agreement that I can transform it into a greenhouse. And so this is the year after that winter that I mentioned, when we passed without any, with a metal roof, sorry. And so I had to cut the concrete, and I had the help of my brother-in-law, my wife's brother. This was in spring. So in fall, in November, we brought these trees from the outside in. They passed the winter with the metal roof on top of them, and then they started to bloom. So then we started to rush removing the roof to give them light. And this was the point where I decided, okay, let's go through the entire summer without any roof, so they will get watered by the rain. So these are young cherry trees. Look, these are the first fruits. I could not believe, we could not believe. It was amazing.
Wow.
And this is the second year. These are apricots. The apricots that you saw in the previous greenhouse, the one with the arches against the house, I brought them here. So these first ones are those ones. And then I bought some more because I couldn't resist.
And you talk about the second layer of plastic between the trees and the ceiling, because you decided in this greenhouse to give a little extra.
Yes, that is crucial, because if we think of the section of a greenhouse, we have the floor. That is the main source of heat in wintertime. Then we have the walls. Regular greenhouses have plastic walls, so they allow the cold that is outside to come in, essentially. So the floor, the walls all around, they were now the former barn walls, and then, as you can see, I created berms on the inside with planting shelves, as you can see on the left side, and all around, as a matter of fact. And also outside, I pushed earth and I created berms. So that solved the walls. The walls now became not a cold source, they became a warm source, because they were warming up from the ground and from the sun when there was a bit of sun. And then it remains the ceiling, the roof. The roof is an immense area if we think in the ensemble. So, and it's exposed to the cold when we have minus, I don't know how many degrees outside, because I think in Celsius always, but yes, when it's freezing outside, that gets cold into the greenhouse 24 hours every day. And so if we find a way to diminish the heat loss through the roof, that is extremely important. And one simple way of doing that is just to put a ceiling plastic, and in the middle part between the top of the roof and this ceiling, we have 6 feet here. So that is a large volume of air, and that air did a great job. I'm just preparing a video now with the temperatures that I measured in 2 winters, which were very, very tough winters, with minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit in that area. And so I monitored the temperature outside, inside the greenhouse, and also in this attic area. And it's amazing. Outside, by memory, we have minus 25. In the attic, we had minus 18. And underneath, we had minus 9 degrees. That is a blessing. And it's free. Once you install that plastic, it doesn't take anything else. It doesn't cost, it doesn't consume anything. Yeah, apricots. Apricots from one of the apricot trees that you saw earlier beside our house.
Wow, just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Nectarines.
Wow.
Table grapes.
Beautiful.
Figs.
Figs. Oh my gosh. Figs.
Yes. Peaches. Yeah, this is an image where you can see the ceiling. And you see
and
it
you can
sits
see the
on
berms. And you can see the
tables
berms very
and
well.
the berms, yes.
Yeah.
And these are vegetables that we planted on the planting shelves of the walls.
I mean, absolutely. I'm just, we watched your video and we're just stunned by it. And as soon as we saw it, we were like, we have to call this guy. And tomatoes, I bet your tomatoes in the summer just go
One
wild.
year I planted tomatoes on the shelves, and this is what we got.
Oh, just beautiful. They're
You see
beautiful
the berm
pictures.
outside.
This gives you a sense of the size of it.
Exactly, yeah. And this can also be arranged into planting shelves outside. And there's a lot of plants that don't need to be in the greenhouse and can arrange a very beautiful ensemble and productive as well.
What is the roof of this now?
It's polyethylene, so plastic, regular 6 mil, they call it, the thickness.
Mm-hmm.
UV treated, that's important. Nothing else.
Oh, very good. Oh, there's some planting.
Yeah, that's an example, but that is made. It's modestly made by me. It's not reality.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
this is how it can look like.
Gotcha. Very nice. Well, boy, I'm curious to know what you think of as your biggest lessons learned, and what you think this technology, the things that you've learned, could show the world about growing food.
Yeah. Look, when I look at it now, I became obviously so familiar. I tend to take it for granted, but the reality is that, look, this greenhouse is in climate zone 4. In climate zone 3, it would be the same. So climate zone 3, 4, 5, we can grow all these fruits that we mentioned without any heating, without any consumption, just with the construction that is appropriate and can protect the trees and create an indoor environment that is appropriate for them. Everything that you saw, all the fruits that we have here are 100% organic. They don't have 1 milligram of pesticides or synthetic fertilizer whatsoever. So tastier than this and more and healthier than this, you cannot find. So there's no choice. I mean, in my mind, it doesn't even fit anymore when you know that you can grow them. And obviously, not everybody may be passionate about that. But within a community, there are some people that may be passionate about that. They know now that they can do it, and they don't depend on anybody. And the cost is minimum. We have electricity, and the annual. I mean, every 2 months the bill is about $28. It's the basic fee for. We use it just to pump the water. We water the trees once a week in spring, summer, and fall, never in winter. So it goes without saying. Now, I'm just hoping that more and more people will learn that they can do it, and they will start doing it.
Yeah, thank you so much for all that. I think we're running a little short on time. We have people asking if they can ask questions, so I'm just going to say, yes, we're going to open it up for questions. If you have questions, you can use your little controls to raise your hand. Otherwise, you can type your questions into the chat box and we'll read them for you. We have a question from Ian, it looks like. If you're starting with a new residential home and can build only one greenhouse, what design would you choose and why?
It's a very good question, but it depends on the municipality. If I were to build a house myself, I would build it integrated with the greenhouse. that goes for sure. But let's say that the house is already there. You have to look the east, the south, and the west walls should be fructified. You should find ways to start growing on them, because they can offer. It depends on the space that you have, but you have to find a way. And you saw a few examples. Now, if you would have a specific configuration, you can email me through via Mike and George, and I can tell you my opinion on how I would do it. But I would maximize the space that I can grow, I can build a greenhouse to the limit, and benefit from it. And by the way, I'm working on something that would allow us to grow even without a greenhouse, so with something that is much smaller. But again, I prefer to discuss about it in detail when it will be ready. But it's just to keep hope that a greenhouse is not the only option.
Rowan is wondering, to build and shape the arches, did you soak the wood?
Yes, ideally, you should start with wood that is not dry, because it becomes rigid and it can break. And you should also soak it. And it depends on the variety. Some need longer than others. There are techniques that are more elaborate. You can also steam it. So at temperature, they will give up even more. But most of the time, you don't need it to curve too much. It's only when you start to build a chair or something that needs to be curved quite a lot. But for construction structures, for a greenhouse, you don't need that. So yes, soaking is one part, and then you have to create a template, and then you will start assembling them with glue and some screws, and you need to have clamps all around. There are a few good videos on YouTube. I will prepare one the next time I will build arches, so people can see what I'm doing as well. But it's nothing extraordinary.
Very good. I'm curious, in the big greenhouse, the 1,200. No, it was how you said. How big is how many square?
400, yeah. Or the last one?
Yeah.
The barn?
Yeah.
The barn is 3,500.
Okay, so do you have any sense of how much food you can harvest from that in a
Quite
year?
a lot. Now, that was so far an experimental greenhouse, and I tried to put in it to plant as many trees as possible. They are way too close to each other. So production was not my objective. Now, as a matter of fact, this summer, spring and summer, I intend to remove, spring actually, to remove some of them to leave more space for the remaining ones to develop. The normal distance between them would be about 8 feet. I have 4 feet. So imagine, but I guess your question is, how big of a greenhouse should we consider to provide for a family or something? And that calculation can start from what we consume. For instance, a couple of 2 people with 10 tomatoes or a dozen tomatoes and a dozen cucumbers that are producing, that would be enough. And you can go and make a list for lettuce and spinach and everything else that you like to eat, and then you can create a list of the necessity in terms of vegetables and fruits, and then you can translate into how much space would need those plants to produce what you need, and that can lead you to how big of a greenhouse can ensure, let's say, more or less 100% food autonomy to a couple or to a family.
Very good. People are also curious about, how do you manage the watering? Is it automated?
We dug a water well the second year. So the first part, I collected water from the roof, and that helped a lot. But everything was improvised. I should have mentioned, this barn is about 200 kilometers away from our home. So getting there back and forth takes about 5 hours. It's not easy to maintain it and to perform work in it. And in the previous years, I was working in real estate and I had properties in that area, and I was sleeping overnight in my car and during the weekends and so on. So that allowed me to do the work that I had to do. Right now, I find it even more difficult. But for the watering system, the simplest one is if you have a water source, let's say a water well or water from the city, you can install a water tank which would be higher, as high as you can in the greenhouse. Ours is on the ground. So from there, I have to use another pump to pump water through a hose that runs throughout the entire greenhouse. But if you have it higher, then with the timer, you can use gravity to come with smaller hoses with perforations to water your shelves, planting shelves, without you even being there.
And again, since you're not maintaining the plants in the winter, you're letting them go dormant. There, you don't need to heat water.
Exactly.
You can just shut the water off
Exactly.
in the winter
Yes.
and
Yes.
leave it be and just leave it. Just wow. Well, you know, we're really, I think, very much out of time. I thank everybody for coming. The video will be posted at transitionlongfellow.org. And you can also find more information there for upcoming Transition on Tap events. Dan, thank you so much for your work. We'll have to stay in touch and see. I would love nothing more than to get a community greenhouse started in the Longfellow neighborhood where we could try this out. And so I know there's been some chatter on the internet about possibly doing that. And I think it would be really an exciting thing to have happen.
I wish you that to happen, because you will be so proud and so happy to enjoy those fruits.
Well, food independence, and it just seems like food connects people.
Yes.
And sharing food and growing food are all good things that we should all do more of, I think. So anyway, thanks again for joining us. And we'll hope to see everybody at future events coming up. Check us out at transitionlongfellow.org. And thanks everyone for coming.
Also, check out your YouTube videos.
And again,
if you haven't watched them.
We'll have a link in the description of this video.
All the best.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.